Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to this TU-Automotive webinar, Is the Connected Car Ready for Autonomy? My name is Annie Redaway. I'm a Senior Project Director at TU-Automotive, and I'm just doing a short introduction today before handing over to the experts. As cars are increasingly reliant on connectivity and software, the automotive industry needs to ensure that the connected element is reliable. Today, our expert panelists will discuss where we are today with automotive connectivity and what we need to do to prepare for full functionality and leading towards the world of autonomous vehicles and mobility that we often hear about in the news. I'd like to introduce and thank our expert moderator and panelists. So, Kason Grover, Senior Group Manager of Vehicle Technology Planning at Hyundai Motor America, Ken Stewart, Chief Business and Technology Officer at Karma Automotive, Sophia Granast, Director of Strategy and Product Management at Wireless Car, and last but not least, Jeffrey Hanna, Director of North America SPD Automotive, who will be taking care of us and guiding us through the topic today. You will have the chance to ask some questions directly of our speakers after their initial panel. Just write in using the GoTo interface, and time permitting, we can address those. So please do remember to send in questions throughout the webinar. And also, just to let you know, we'll be sending around a recording of today's session to all those who have registered, and you can expect to receive that later this week. But you've heard enough from me. You're not here from me. I'd like to hand over to our moderator, Jeffrey Hanna.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining TU-Automotive's most timely webinar. We're excited to have you join us. My name is Jeffrey Hanna. I direct the North America office of SPD Automotive. SPD is the world-leading automotive technology research firm helping our clients with their connected car, autonomous car, and secure car strategies. Stay with us to hear from today's experts on what are the opportunities, challenges, and potential consequences for various players in the value chain for connected cars as we fully enter an autonomous world. I'd now like to ask each of our today's panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Sophia Granith with Wireless Car.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophia Granat, and I'm really devoted to redefine the service in the connected world and apply it on the automotive business. And that really pushed the boundary of digital transformation in every business and of course our connected lifestyle. At Wireless Car, that is exactly what we are doing. We are creating the connected car and applying services that actually provides all the true value beyond the connectivity in the cities as well as for the end users. So being a digital evangelist in my previous life at Autoliv Research, working with sensors, or at R&D director at Ascom Wireless, working with mission critical connectivity for hospitals. I've seen a number of obstacles in digitalization transformation, and that's really I'm looking forward to addressing this seminar.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Kason?
Hi, this is Kason Grover with Hyundai Motor America. I'm in charge of vehicle technology planning, which includes connected car, ADAS autonomous, and multimedia navigation.
Excellent. Ken?
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. My name is Ken Stewart. I'm Chief Business and Technology Officer for Karma Automotive. Karma is a new company. We now design, engineer, build, and sell the Karma Revero. Just a brief thumbnail sketch. Our chairman bought the assets from the Fisker car company, which you may have heard of. It's a good place to start to build our own luxury car brand. The Revero is a luxury electric four-door grand touring car. It can go about 50 miles on a charge. And then it's got a onboard generator to generate more electricity on demand for 300 miles range. And important for today's discussion, the Revero is a connected car already. It has 4G LTE connected capability, and we can send over-the-air software and firmware updates to the fleet even after they've been sold all across North America. Tesla, Rimac, and Karma, I think, are the only ones that are in business of doing this at this point in time. Now that we have the full value chain up and running, and the company will be expanding to Europe and to China with more products. And my job is to be in charge of the product plan and developing the technology roadmap for the company.
Excellent, Ken. So as Annie Redaway said, we'll start with some questions for the panelists. In about 30 minutes, we'll open it up for a Q&A from all the audience. So as we look at today's topic, is the connected car ready for autonomy? I'd really like to ask our panelists a central fundamental question. We really seem to be split among industry participants, whether they be major OEMs or technology disruptors such as Waymo, on whether autonomous cars absolutely, positively need to be connected. Do autonomous cars need to be connected, and why? And I'll ask Ken, sort of pivoting off his opening with OTA.
Yeah, well, thanks. The key word is need, I think. Needs to be connected, no. But should it be whenever possible? Absolutely, yes. From my perspective, it's about getting as much information around the bend, around that corner of the road as possible. More information about road conditions, accidents, data in the surrounding areas reduces the risk. And that's what so much of this industry is facing, is how to reduce risk. Now, there are going to be times when you can't be connected. If you're in the tunnel from Detroit to Canada, or the Holland Tunnel in New York, or other places around the world, or very rural areas where connectivity may be a problem, then that's the tricky part from my perspective, where the car also has to know how to behave on its own for periods of time. But the idea is connect whenever you can, because more information is better.
Kason or Sophia?
As I see it, of course, as Ken is pointing out, is a necessity with the surrounding environment. And I mean, it's our expectation on what autonomous means. The purpose and intention with the ride, and what I do expect from the car, understanding, when the heat is going to be on the level I would like to know, or the slippery road warning, and if the car really has the possibility to stop and, adjust the speed. So the next few meters for driving, no connectivity is not a must. Onboard intelligence is really powerful. But the purpose and intention and making the ride really valuable, that is for me connected only. That's going to provide it.
That's excellent perspective. And obviously, with connectivity comes cost. Connectivity is certainly not free. And in sort of our research with the major players in the market, the predominant business model is still that automakers must pay wireless carriers for every megabyte of data consumed. So is it really realistic to expect autonomous cars to be collecting and sending terabytes or even petabytes of data to the cloud every day? So, Sophie, I'll ask you to start. And how do you think about these potential connectivity charges?
Well, actually, it's both cost and latency that are really the perspectives to consider in managing big data. So you've got the cost of storage and communication, and you have the time that communication and processing actually requires. So those are the two elements. And of course, we need to have the sort of a wise integration between onboard and offboard intelligence. So we need to continuously evolve the both, technology tracks. And you have, the quantum computing on board versus the crowd-based analytics that both, provide different values to the intelligence needed for the car. But I mean, I'm just going to address the terabyte big data that you were addressing. And those are the sensor data that are actually not needed to send to the cloud or anything like it for the actual autonomous drive. But of course, you need to send that kind of data during the product development. So in that sense, you really don't need to manage that sort of big data when the autonomous car is actually driving. Of course, you do have the navigation and journey logs to manage during the ride. So in that sense, different companies, sensor developers and car makers, they need to work with big chunks of big data during product development. But during operation, you really don't need that sort of data management. So I mean, just a few years ago, streaming videos were not really that realistic, and now this is a default usage in everyday life, isn't it?
Absolutely,
Right,
Sophia. Oh, go ahead, Kason.
I was just going to say those are great points, and I was going to mention that on the previous question, right? That some of these answers are a little bit different in development, where we think we do need to be connected and analyzing all the data going on as we test autonomous cars, but we then have to consider what will happen in production. But it's fair to say right now, you know, and we at Hyundai have been in the connected market here in the U.S. for just about 7 years, and we have hundreds of thousands of connected cars, and we're already looking at other situations that increase, you know, the need for data to and from the car. So that's something that's growing now, but certainly as we look toward autonomous, that's something we're still figuring out, right? Is what exactly is that data requirement going to be, and how does it differ from development to production?
Yeah, Kason, it sounds like, you know, in terms of whether it's next gen or next gen, you're going to have to think about how much headroom you're going to have to leave in your data plans to accommodate all these new use cases. Would that be fair to say?
That's exactly right, yes.
Ken, any
And I mean,
thoughts
talking
on,
about the, sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead, Sophia.
Just wanted to point out, and that what we really need to address, of course, is how to manage the security, availability, and performance on those really mission critical features in a time where everything else is connected and need continuous update. So if we really provide that sort of framework, then we have something to start with.
Excellent. So why don't we switch gears for a moment? Sadly, 2 weeks back, we experienced an incredibly sad tragedy in Phoenix, here in the U.S. with an autonomous Uber and pedestrian fatality. It's way too early to speculate or really pass any judgment, and we're absolutely not going to do that here today. However, you know, as this panel is talking about connected cars and autonomy, what are some of the positive roles that connectivity can play in either the prevention or analysis of future incidents or future testing? So I'll let Kason Grover kick this discussion off.
Sure. Connectivity can really help in a couple of ways. And as you said, we don't yet know exactly what happened, therefore we don't know exactly how to prevent that particular case. But I would point out, I think connectivity would bring us cloud diagnosis of data, right? So if we've had possibly a sensor failure or something like that, that could have been detected, that could have been analyzed, and we might have learned something and been able to send some sort of message to the vehicle that, hey, this vehicle shouldn't be in autonomous mode right now, and perhaps that could even be automatically pulled to the side of the road and stopped at that point. So there's sort of the collection of sensor data, the analysis, and bringing the cloud side into that. You've just got so much capacity to handle so much data and potentially detect something that might not otherwise be detected. And then really a huge area for connectivity to help with something like this would be over-the-air updates. So whatever we learn from looking at that data or from just any signal from the vehicle, there might be a change, right? There might be a change in the logic. There might be a new capability. So in my opinion, it's going to be very critical to have over-the-air update capability for any autonomous vehicle, because we're still learning, and in my opinion, we'll always still be learning to some extent. So to me, that's the biggest, right? Is that ability to learn and change. Some of that can be done on board, but looking across an entire fleet and learning from it and then making changes, I think that's where the real kind of power of the cloud comes in.
Yeah, Jeffrey, let me build on that. I think that's good. There's also a debate currently on how the car is to go about approaching situations such as the one in Arizona. Should the car be designed to simply learn on its own, or should the car have all the what they call use cases or all the situations sort of pre-described in its memory? And I think maybe that was a heads up to people that you can't be one or the other. Obviously, the car must learn and the whole system must get smarter over time. It's bound to, and it should. but it's very hard to pre-engineer every situation. And that was obviously a very difficult one with a single lone person in the middle of the night in the middle of the road. And so it's not like the engineers can kick back and think up all these scenarios. So there needs to be, I think, a lot of connectivity, and as I mentioned earlier, information of what's around the bend or outside of even the sensor array to know that something is coming. More connectivity is going to certainly help those situations.
And that is a really good point, Ken. And an area where I'm really fond of is the human-vehicle interaction. I really would love to see cars as an integrated part of the city, where we actually right now have the ability to create the road user awareness and start to changing some behaviors. Is not a matter of how much intelligence we build in the car, but it's also a matter of how the road users, occupants, and people on bikes, pedestrian, how they are actually approaching the infrastructure and the mobility and all the vehicles in it. So it's a matter of with connectivity features, of course, creating sort of warnings, having wearables or whatever, to creating that sort of situation awareness for every road user, and vehicles are just part of it.
Those are all excellent points. As we've looked across the OEM landscape, it seems that most automakers have made announcements or organizing teams around that CASE framework, so connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. And I'd like to talk about how autonomous vehicles are really impacting how each of you are thinking about your own organizational structures, and really the need that connectivity and connected car teams are needing to work closely with both autonomous and mobility services, probably for the first time, as opposed in sort of isolation. So Ken, maybe you can start on really, as you think about these worlds that we're almost running in parallel, how do connected, autonomous, and shared cars coming together? How's that impacting the way your organization is structured there at Karma?
Yeah, that's a good question. My career, I've been a part of some long, decades-long, centuries-long automotive companies, and then obviously Karma is essentially 4 years old, and so we have both the burden and the blessing of not having any old legacy systems. So we've started out engineering and organizing ourselves to approach the new order. And it's pretty obvious among, I think, all the OEMs that it's very difficult for any one automaker to take on everything themselves. It requires a much greater level of partnership with industry, tier ones, and sometimes very small scientific startups. And of course, we've all seen the waking up that has occurred in Silicon Valley and the close ties now between tech and automotive that were not there at all to this level even 5 years ago. So partnerships, the idea of sort of organic relationships where everyone has their core competencies and then it gets organized and built together. Where this really, rubber meets the road is how you manage these at the program level, because the speed of technology is so much faster than the speed of a conventional automotive program. And so you have to manage different timelines at the same time. So the program managers have to be sort of split-minded about how they manage the different time frames, the different life cycles, the different learning curves, and how they staff for it. It's a fun challenge, but it's a real challenge.
And obviously, Ken, that's going to impact HR teams, how you're recruiting. So those thoughts have implications really across the board.
Yeah, they do. It's every facet. It's IT to how you design your facility, to HR, to financial systems. It's across the board.
Kason, obviously you're a more established company there at Hyundai Motor America. Take us through, how do you guys think about an evolving organization when it's not just BlueLink, but autonomous vehicles, shared, and all these potentially new responsibilities?
Sure, I think they're kind of two facets to it. There's right here in the U.S. in my organization, I have a dedicated manager for ADAS and autonomous, and simply put, that wasn't true about a year and a half ago. So we're a pretty lean team, so that's a pretty big change. So we've got somebody dedicated full time to that area. Of course, I've got the connected car team as well, and there will be some work related to autonomous there. But then there's the global aspect as well with our parent company. And we were at CES a little over a year ago with an autonomous Ioniq, and that was entirely an internal development. So that was our R&D team really kind of learning and proving that they could do it, not necessarily to say that we'll never partner with anybody outside, which isn't really realistic, but it was in order that the engineering teams could understand every aspect of an autonomous vehicle, so that if something was sort of subbed out or a partner was brought in, they could understand it and have those have the right conversations and strategically decide how to go outside the organization. About a year later, around CES this year, we made the announcement that we've brought on Aurora as a partner. So we don't have a whole lot of details to share about exactly where that's going, but that shows you kind of the steps, right? There was almost a kind of skunkworks organization that got the first car done, and now things are opening up, and a lot of that responsibility's moved into kind of a more production-oriented standard R&D team to get something moving toward production. So of course we'll have more news in the future on what that means from a timing standpoint, but absolutely behind the scenes there have been big changes moving this responsibility again from sort of skunkworks, pure R&D into more of a pre-production environment. So big news to come in the near future.
Absolutely, Case. And I'd like to get Sophia's thoughts on this question. Obviously, at Wireless Car, you're working with multiple OEMs and really have visibility into the broad landscape. Are you finding yourself having to knock on the doors of new teams? Are you playing the role of getting everyone in the room on the same page? Or how does that look like from a supplier or partner perspective?
Wireless Car is a software company which have a really high speed of transformation, meaning that we are on a different level of service creation with our different OEM customers, which really puts a lot of new perspective in the way we make stuff. And being a service designer, we really believe that many of the business-to-business companies need to think business to consumer all the way. Otherwise, the service is not really providing the end-to-end value. Most of all, right now, I see all of the new mobility services being acknowledged with the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, providing, equality and sustainable development and having efficient mobility. These options are really providing meaning to every colleague of mine. We all are, finding the real purpose and meaning of the context of all the services we are providing. And I really love that perspective.
Jeffrey, could I just say one more point about this? You'd brought up connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. Out of those four, the way I see it is only one of them is starting to flatten out and become mature, and that's electric. They're looking for cost reduction and better packaging and refinement, but the level of invention is beginning to settle down. But for the other three, the speed of invention is still accelerating. The list of new ideas is not flattening out. So I find these technologies are still growing in leaps and bounds. And part of managing this new world order is at what point do automakers grab the innovation and start to harden it up for mass production? And that alone is a challenge when it's such a wild area of invention and refinement and renewal that's underway. You're
totally right, Ken. I mean, the need of different layers of ecosystem, the frameworks managing economics and agreements and all the data transactions. Those are really forcing multiple brands and multiple players to really need to work together. Otherwise, many of these services are not going to be realized.
Absolutely. So, Sophia, if you had to bring in autonomous experts and mobility experts in the wireless car just to make sure you're meeting the needs of your OEM customers, given that you're going beyond just connected services to really that full case framework.
That's correct, because car management services for autonomous car are actually different from ordinary modern car that we have today. And the way new car makers are providing, online purchasing features or experience centers, or the way they want to having on-demand manufacturing, all of those perspective requires really new services that are not existing today, but need to be in order to provide those new business.
Terrific. Sophie, I want to stay with you. You had mentioned a bit earlier in our conversation about the cloud being such an incredible enabler for a connected autonomous car. And we'll start with Sophia and then open up to the panel on how are each of your cloud platforms evolving to support and really embrace new connected and autonomous use cases. So what's happening with the cloud, and how are each of your companies really taking advantage of that?
Yeah, and for some years ago, the big question was if cloud, and after that it was what kind of cloud, and now is how to integrate the different cloud solutions. So, of course, the different platforms are focusing whether you have legacy transformation challenge, or whether you're in need of having the multiple service focus and end user maturity in digital space, or whether you're really focusing getting the analytics and quantum computing in place. So the question is really what kind of dynamic and rich infrastructure do you need in order to really put your effort in what's creating the differentiating engine for you, as well as opening the doors for the ecosystem interaction that you need. So in that sense, we really want to create that kind of dynamic world for our customers to manage the business between the different, can I say, application? Because it doesn't matter what kind of storage you have, but the application around the car and managing car as an asset, and application around the user and managing all the mobility services that I need, and enabling the different businesses for the maintenance services or fleet services or whatever. So for me, that is the challenge right now to make it possible. And I believe that we have a very good approach in our framework to making that happen.
Absolutely. I'd love to get the OEM perspective and from Ken and Kaysen on whether each of you are embracing a cloud-first strategy, as well as you think about cloud, what are some of the new use cases each of your companies are able to now enable?
Well, let me jump in terms of Karma's approach so far. We've been in production and in commerce for just under a year, and if you sort of divide this up between transmission and storage and processing the data, I wouldn't say that we are in the situation of being cloud or storage restricted. Transmission, we're not restricted, but we know that as automakers are moving more and more data, that will become an issue. But at this stage, we're actually more processing restricted in the sense that we're getting so much information that we need to properly digest it and deal with it effectively. We're meeting at 7 a.m. every morning in order to monitor the vehicles that are both at the dealers and in customer hands. And we know when there's a sniffle, not just a cold, on any of these cars even before they do. And so with that amount of data already, then we've got to figure out how do we process this going forward. As far as where we go with the cloud and the cloud enablers, we're good for now, but we do know that as the fleet expands, we go into Europe and to China, that the solution has to be very common across regional carriers and across regional capability. And security, as Sophia mentioned, is going to be a huge issue going forward as well.
Kason, what's your level of interaction with your IT teams, and how are you thinking about the cloud and these new enablers in terms of your BlueLink or other services?
Well, it's one of the big things we did a while back here at HMA, and then where there's been a bit of a change globally as well. We've actually pulled my area into the same larger team that handles all of IT, so both the connected car side and the enterprise side, because we basically think there are a lot of advantages in just looking at all of our technology and thinking about how it can affect the vehicles and the customer experience going forward. So on the cloud side, our global team certainly has been building up kind of its big data capabilities. So looking at more kind of cloud or upward diagnostics. And that's something that's really just ramping up. So we'll have more news on that in the future. And then from a customer perspective, one of the first moves we did, really taking advantage of our platform and extending it to other devices, was the launch of our IoT platform. And the first two consumer applications that came out of that were our Alexa skill and our integration with Google Assistant. So those have been live for a good while now. We get a lot of customer usage. That's kind of an initial expansion. So that's taking existing capabilities and adapting to let consumers bring their own devices into the picture. I think the next big pushes will be other consumer-facing sort of, let's say, cloud-based or vehicle data-based services. So we'll have more information in the future, but it's certainly safe to say, we're looking at things like the insurance space, the payment space, those areas. We have announced, we're working with a company called Smart Car on expanding into some other services. So we'll have more news on that integration in the near future. So we're really looking at all the possible aspects, and a lot of that's really looking at what's possible with the vehicle, data coming from the vehicle today, and building out this capability will only serve us better as we move into car sharing, other mobility solutions, and things like that. So having more of the user's profile stored in the cloud and being able to take that to multiple places is definitely a place that we're going.
Terrific. Let's change gears for a moment. Obviously, this is a panel about connected cars, and we've seen some exciting announcements and progress around V2X technology. So I'm going to ask each of you to talk about and sort of share what you can say about the role of V2X, either vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure, and the role it'll ultimately play in autonomy. So, Kason, without anything proprietary, how are you thinking about V2X, and what are some things V2X could enable on the road to autonomous?
Yeah, the interesting thing about V2X, and I'll just throw out a couple of examples so we're all on the same page. I tend to think, or at least a couple example features. On the infrastructure side, we'd be looking at things like traffic signal communication, that sort of thing. And then on the vehicle-to-vehicle side, the first things that pop into my mind are things like intersection assist. So, of course, knowing some other vehicles approaching, regardless of the fact that the light's red, they're doing a certain speed and they're not applying their brakes, so they will not stop, and you can make decisions based on that. And then I also think a lot about vehicles sharing sensor data. So the idea that you're on a pretty busy freeway, there's someone in front of you, and most of your sensors can't really see past that car. But if you share data, you could see several cars ahead, and something that might be a true emergency braking situation for the car in front, might now be something that can be handled fairly easily several cars back because there's a little more time to process. So those are the types of things I'm talking about. And the way I think about those is, if you think about the sensors in the vehicle today, they work a lot like the human senses, and it's mostly the eye that we're talking about. It's what you can see. So camera, radar, LiDAR, these things, generally speaking, you're not seeing through objects. You have the same limitation that the human eye does, and you can process roughly the same information. So we're just effectively trying to replicate the human brain and the human senses and make similar decisions, hopefully better over time, of course, with AI. But there's a certain limit to that. So what V2X does is open us up past that. So now you can see around the corners, you can see, effectively around the buildings, around any obstacle, and that sort of thing. And what's great about it is, I think we've seen at this point that this is not 100% required to have autonomous driving, because absolutely there have been millions of miles of test drives out there with autonomous vehicles, and generally speaking, this technology has not been available. So we've proven that we can do it. But the great thing about V2X is the types of features I'm talking about, they help the driver, whether that's a human or whether that's the car itself. So it's really an enhancement that'll help us in this near-term future where we'll start to have autonomous vehicles, but we still have human drivers, frankly, for quite some time. And I just think that's it's a big part of the future. We're actively involved, for example, with CAMP, with some of the consortia out there working on this. So again, it's one of those ones where there'll be some news in the future. We're not in the market today, but as far as the industry, we've started to see the first few applications, and I think we're starting to get to where we're going to see mass adoption, hopefully within the next few years.
Let me jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, so I think this is a good topic, and I'm hopeful for both V2X and V2V. I'm optimistic about vehicle to vehicle, and Kaysen was very good in outlining some of the benefits. Totally agree. And I think the key to vehicle is, can various automakers come to common communication systems so that we've got a handshake between basically competitive car brands. We need sort of the USB port version of this for it to work, but I think they can work that out. But I have to say, I'm a little more pessimistic about the progress on V2X. It's a good idea. It certainly has benefits to be connected to streetlights, and I can foresee autonomous lanes on freeways very soon, and many good benefits. But at least in the US, I think it's going to be hindered by the urban centers. A lot of these cities are broke, and they don't have the wherewithal to be able to set up the systems to be able to do this. They're still talking about 3G in some places. And so I don't think we can rely on the urban centers coming up to speed as quickly as the vehicle to vehicle. Now, that may be a more optimistic outlook in China and European cities, but in the US, I hope it happens. But again, I'm kind of on the negative side of being a realist there.
Excellent. Now, Sophia,
I sort of agree with you. Yeah, I'm jumping on it, Jeff. I sort of agree with you, Ken, in regards with that. We need to, start with some context and examples, focusing on zero fatality. That vision that have been sort of a major point on our agenda in Sweden. That is one thing. But no accident vision, that is a whole other. And zero accident are really a point for many insurance companies, but also the city. So the business mode perspective of having a functional V2X and creating the last mile mobility and sharing mobility, that really would have many benefits in making the V2X functioning. And I agree with you that that is not really possible for every city, but we need to create the sort of scenarios in some cases, in some cities, to be the first one to really set the ground and tell everyone else what is required to make that work. So, yeah.
That's great perspective, Sophia. As an industry analyst, I not only moderate a lot of panels, but I watch them. And one of the biggest pet peeves is when the panel does not allow time for Q&A. And the good news is we've got about 10 minutes here for question and answer. So I'm going to turn it over to our host, Annie Redaway of TU-Automotive, who will be monitoring the chat window. And we will now open it up for questions from the audience. Annie will read out the question and we'll steer those to one of our esteemed panelists to get your questions answered.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And you've covered a lot of great topics there, and you've had quite a few questions come in. So I will try to pick out the most relevant and also do justice in answering as many as possible. So earlier, I think you were talking about the connectivity itself and kind of the providers of connectivity. And someone sent in, obviously, the general question was around if OEMs are paying cellular providers for data delivery, is this a sustainable business model?
Let me jump in with that first. I have the luxury of being in the luxury car business. So our customers are high net worth and the base price is $130,000, et cetera. So obviously this is not a mass market vehicle. With that, we're able to tolerate some of these costs for connectivity in the price point of the car, and the customers and users are high users of technology and expect it. So it's sustainable for me because Karma intends to stay in the luxury segment, but I totally understand the challenges in some of the lower price point areas. And the level of connectivity, the level of data that is going to have to be managed is going to go up exponentially. So costs will be going up likely as well. So it is a factor, but luckily I've got a fair amount of runway with Karma.
Right, and this is Kaysen. Of course, we're on the other side of that. I do span, from entry-level subcompact vehicles, which are now connected as of last year in our lineup for the first time, up through the Genesis luxury brand. So from our perspective, as more of a mass market OEM, it's really all about scale and it's all about planning and having a good feel for what that data requirement is going to be, and then negotiating contracts accordingly. So that the per vehicle impact is lessened as we can plan across everything. Now, as we look toward autonomous and have much higher data requirements, that's when we need to talk about the types of things that might go, if it's not real time, the types of things that could go over Wi-Fi at night, at least for certain customers, and look at alternatives like that. So we're certainly looking at everything that's possible. So I think the business model ultimately is sustainable, at least in the near future. I do think we have to be more creative if we start to get into really exponential increases in the amount of data.
And from wireless car perspective, we do everything we can to actually achieve the dream that every car can be connected from a factory. And that is the way we build our services and platform. And the only driver for that is that connected services really need the mass market. They need to be used by a daily basis of many. So if that's going to happen, then many need to have access to the connected services. So that needs to be available for everyone. So in that sense, we do everything we can to make it possible.
Okay, thanks. Jeffrey, did you have anything to add there?
No, I think we'll just maybe take the next question, Annie.
Sure. Now, there are a couple of different questions that have branched off from that, and I'll start with one topic first. So, I mean, you were mentioning there kind of the need to, I think it was Kaysen who was talking about kind of when you update the data is it overnight? Is it via Wi-Fi? So someone had actually been asking about that. So how is it that we're going to do OTA updates? And someone, let me just find it because it's been pushed down. Someone else was asking about OTA updates in terms of kind of the need to, if we're doing over-the-air updates, what are the connectivity requirements for that? And also touching on that, how do we make sure that they are coming from the right source to the right source?
Well, I can
this is
start.
Kason.
Go ahead, Kason.
I can jump in on this one. I think the various data pipes to the car, each could have a place as we talk about OTA. And of course, OTA can mean many different things. We're seeing the industry basically start with head unit type updates, map updates, maybe head unit firmware. But generally speaking, there's a pretty good consensus that we're going to need to get into all areas of the car over time. When we think about the cost of that and we consider the different pipelines, certainly using kind of a cellular pipeline, traditional vehicle connectivity is going to be probably the highest cost way to do that. But you always need to weigh that cost against the benefit that you get from the over-the-air update. So when we consider those things, we have to consider them across the organization and say, does this have a warranty cost save benefit or possibly some kind of a recall or something like that? Those things are very, very expensive. And we spend a lot today sending software updates out manually so that they're done via USB or some other method or a tool at the dealership. And there's dealer labor with that as well. So you kind of have to consider that entire supply chain, if you will, for delivering updates today when you look at this cost. So there are ways to put it in there and say you can actually still save quite a bit because these are very expensive things, especially when you're talking about a fleet where we're selling hundreds of thousands of cars a year. So the pipeline may vary. We always have to consider that not everybody will park their car in a place that has Wi-Fi access, and then it's not reasonable to expect a customer to turn on their phone hotspot and pay for data through their own phone. That doesn't make sense unless we're selling them something incremental. But that's one of the big things we try to do is look across the whole organization and say, what are we spending today, and what is this saving us? So maybe that cost isn't unreasonable at all, even though it's kind of a shock at first.
Ken, did you have a thought there on this one?
Yeah, let me pipe in. We've had 6 major software upgrades to our fleet since we started last year. And we send these in bundles, usually in the evening hours, but the evening varies because of the time zones. And there is a very focused effort on our part for security key connectivity so that we know what we're sending, the car confirms, et cetera, et cetera. And it is cellular because of the cellular signals that we have ongoing to the cars. And another requirement is our owners have to accept it. So we don't push things into the car unless they say, yes, that's okay. And it has been a successful process. And then obviously we're able to monitor the vehicles after the over-the-air update has occurred so we can confirm that everything is up to snuff. So it's been working pretty well. The key now is how do we expand on that? And just one more point, totally agree with Kason that, our effort is largely to the head unit and the main computer, but we also have electrical architecture on board where it's touching many other computers and processors on board the vehicle from there. But that way we can control the security much more easily.
Yeah,
Annie,
talking
do we
about
have time for one more
security.
question?
Sure. Just wanted to point out that design based on security is what we do in in whatever services that the car makers want to have. So security by design as much as privacy by design are the sort of creating the platform for the services.
Thank you. Jeffrey, you were asking if we had time for more question. I mean, from our side, I think we have time for one. Is everyone good for another one?
Sure.
Great. So this one is kind of reflecting a little bit current events in the news, different from the one we were talking about earlier, but I thought it was quite an interesting question. So with some of the recent controversy around social media on privacy, which is making, at least in the UK, quite a big impact on the way that people are choosing to share their data and have their data used. How are connected car folks, phrase the questioner used, internalizing the need to reset the monetization opportunities, kind of looking at coming regulatory demands and kind of consumer ideas around privacy? To rephrase that a little bit, basically, is this playing into some of the upcoming planning on the way that you're interacting with consumer data?
Well, let me take a first shot at that. It's a bit of a sticky one if you go off into the fringe of some of these discussions, just because of the legal aspects of who owns the data and security, something that matters very much to our customers, as I'm sure it does everyone else's. Our goal in our connectivity and our over-the-air updates and so forth is to help provide the best vehicle experience possible. And if we focus on seamless use of the vehicle and how the customer uses it, then that tends to clear the way for what data is important. And so that is sort of our mantra as we go forward. And it seems to be pretty good. I think a lot of these issues of social media and data security and stuff is only going to escalate just because of what's happening both in in the social circles and political circles. But we're pretty clear on what we need to do and why we need to do it, and so far so good, I would say.
And this is Casey, and I'll jump in on this one. As we do expand the types of services, I think it's important to consider that the privacy principles are core to everything we do. So we're always looking at what do our current terms and conditions say. Are we offering a benefit to the customer, and is it covered under those, or do we need to consider maybe a second level opt-in or something like that? So, and certainly on the cybersecurity side, we're putting in and already have robust procedures there. So the key thing I want to point out is the principles, privacy, consumer data. That's something we think about with everything we do. So some of those services I mentioned for likely future expansion, those are incremental to what we do today, and you're likely to see some sort of individual opt-in. So if we were going to share with a third party, we'd say, here's the benefit. Do you want to do it or not? Some will opt out, some will opt in, and we think that's a good approach going forward.
From wireless car perspective, I mean, in designing the services, this is why it's so important to having the end user perspective. Whether you're a consumer and want to have a number of mobility services or a smart in-car climate service, we need to separate it from, car management services. But we need to apply the integration perspective. And this is where we create a different context and different scenarios to really visualize where the boundaries are. And without those scenarios, it's really difficult to set the frameworks and policies and say, this is the privacy rules and these are the security rules. So in that sense, scenarios and context are really important for designing the services.
Great, thank you. Yes, sorry, Jeffrey, did something to say there?
I was just going to wrap it up from our side. This really concludes today's TU-Automotive webinar. Thank you to TU-Automotive, our panelists, and all of you joining us today. Maybe Annie can explain how you can get a download of the webinar, and really wanted to thank everyone today.
Yeah, and thank you very much. Thanks. I really want to thank all of you for participating. It's a really interesting discussion. Thanks all for giving your time. I know for some of you it's quite late in the day as well. And as Jeffrey said, have a look at, basically we'll be sending you out the recording to your email that you signed up for the webinar with. So if you see an email from me that says your webinar recording, click on it. It's legit. But many of the questions that we've addressed today, along with other topics, I saw a few people sent in questions about V2X and 5G, for example, will be explored further at the TU-Automotive Detroit Conference and Exhibition on June the 6th and 7th in Novi in Michigan. There'll also be a chance to meet all our panelists in person, because actually we're very lucky to have all of them there at the event. For more information and full conference agenda, please visit the website. The address is at the bottom of your screen. But for now, on behalf of TU-Automotive, thank you ever so much to Kason, Ken, Sophia, and Jeffrey, and thank you all for listening. As I said, you'll get an email soon with details on how to download the audio, and thank you all very much for participating.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Annie, and everybody.
Thank you, everybody.